Speaker, the bill we're actually talking to is the Motor Vehicle Sales Amendment Bill. I don't need to explain anymore. I think we're getting away from...
Thank you. The member has raised a point of order of relevancy, and in a second reading, that is the tightest debate that we do actually have. So I'd ask the member to refer specifically to the bill. Claire Curran.
Mr Speaker, in addressing the Motor Vehicle Sales Amendment Bill, there is, and as I was referring to, a worrying editorial in the Otago Daily Times which described New Zealand's meat industry as heading for a train crash. Yet this, and that was reported on the 15th of June, and our meat industry is very important along with our rail engineering industry and many other industries. Yet this, while we're dealing with the Motor Vehicle Sales Amendment Bill, this government prefers to sit on its hands and do nothing about that industry and many of the other industries that, where there are major job losses occurring. Instead, the government seems to believe that the House's time is better devoted to legislation on the sale of used cars rather than the livelihoods and well-being of New Zealand workers and their family. And many of these people, Mr Speaker, are not able to or are struggling to afford to run a car, let alone consider selling one and buying another one, because of the rising costs that they're facing, cost of living, particularly around electricity and petrol costs as a result of the emissions trading scheme, costs that are being put onto ordinary consumers. And they're also facing cost rises in GST, which are going to affect ordinary people, and many of whom are losing their jobs and are struggling to find new jobs. And Mr Speaker, while I was reflecting on the bill and its importance in this context, I started thinking about the used cars that I myself have owned over the years, and a number of cars that other members of the House have owned. And I certainly know that our very well-respected Speaker, Mr Lockwood Smith, certainly takes a great interest in cars. And I reflected on my first car, and I thought I'd share with the House a little story about my first car, a motor vehicle that was bought and sold on a number of occasions, being constructed in 1948 and being a Morris 10. And with it was a very nice car. Cost $125. Bought in, I think, around 1978, 1979, and Maurice, his name was, and when I bought him, he was in a paddock, and he was being a 1948 Morris 10. He had running boards and those little indicators that went like that. Owned no iPad, but there was a crank that you had to turn sometimes when the engine wouldn't work. And Mr Speaker, with reference to the Motor Vehicle Sales Amendment Bill, Maurice served me well for a number of years and was eventually replaced by a 1959 Volkswagen. And I, reflecting on that, a number of members in the House will have owned a number of vehicles during their lifetime, and many of them would have been used cars that would be very relevant to this bill, the Motor Vehicle Sales Amendment Bill. Which, on a more serious note, the Motor Vehicle Sales Act 2003 came into force in December 2003, which replaced the Motor Vehicles Dealers Act 1975. And the Motor Vehicle Sales Act made fundamental changes to the way in which sales of motor vehicles were regulated. And this bill amends the Motor Vehicle Sales Act that was passed by the Labor government actually in December 2003. And the objective of the Motor Vehicle Sales Act 2003 was to promote and protect the interests of consumers in relation to their motor vehicle sales, but sadly by that time Maurice had been sold and had passed on, and I think ended up in a paddock with plants growing through him. Its aim is to reduce compliance costs, close loopholes and improve the effective operation of the Motor Vehicle Sales Act. And that Act sought to introduce a new registration regime for motor vehicle traders and make them more accountable to consumers, but also to offer some degree of flexibility to participate in the motor vehicle industry. And the policy underpinning this Act had several core elements to ensure accountability, and accountability, Mr Speaker, is a very, very important word, and it's something that, you know, as members of the House we all take very seriously. And these included the requirement for those trading vehicles to be registered, for more disclosure concerning used motor vehicles, and the provision for consumer remedy through the Motor Vehicles Disputes Tribunal. This bill increases the financial limit on the jurisdiction of the Motor Vehicles Disputes Tribunal from $50,000 to $100,000, and it's vitally important that consumers have avenues for recourse when it comes to trading. The bill also intends to reduce the compliance costs on traders currently associated with requiring an annual statutory declaration to be made as part of the registration renewal process. And the Motor Vehicle Sales Amendment Bill was referred to the Commerce Committee on the 30th of June 2009, which actually happened to be the date almost a year ago on which I last spoke on the bill. And now it's very urgently back in the House again today during urgency for its second reading. The closing date for submissions was the 20th of August 2009, and the Commerce Committee reported back to the House on the 14th of December 2009. So how many months is that? That would be around 6 months and 8 days, 9 days. 10 days. We received and considered 8 submissions from interested groups and individuals, and we heard 2 submissions. And I would like to thank my fellow committee members for their work on this bill, as well as the Ministry of Consumer Affairs for their advice. And as a member of the Commerce Committee, I've helped examine the Motor Vehicle Sales Amendment Bill and recommend that it pass with a number of amendments. And it would be also interesting to hear today from other members about their own experiences with used cars and you know, any interesting stories that they could share with the House. I've only ever owned one car that had a name, and it'd be interesting to know whether other members of the House have named their cars, and I commend the bill to the House.